The sun rose weakly over the dry plains, its pale light spreading across a village that had long forgotten what abundance looked like. The once fertile soil had cracked into jagged lines, and the riverbed that used to sing with rushing water now lay silent and thirsty. The huts stood stubbornly against the winds, their thatched roofs sagging from years of neglect, while the villagers went about their daily struggle with weary faces. Hunger had become a constant companion, a shadow that walked with everyone. In this place where poverty ruled, even laughter carried a sharp edge, and kindness often felt like a luxury that no one could afford to give. Amid these struggles lived Amina, a young woman whose spirit had not yet been broken, though the world seemed determined to test her resilience. Her days began before the sun had fully risen. She would wrap a faded cloth around her head, tie her worn sandals, and carry an old clay pot to the nearest well, which was several miles away. The journey was long and punishing, her feet blistered from walking the same dusty path day after day. Yet Amina endured without complaint, because her sick mother, frail and bedridden, needed her strength to survive. Every drop of water she fetched, every grain of food she managed to gather, was for her mother's sake. Though her clothes were patched and her stomach often empty, Amina carried herself with quiet dignity. She did not speak harshly, nor did she envy those who had more. Instead, she found ways to share even in her scarcity. When she cooked a small portion of porridge, she would take a spoonful and offer it to the neighbor's hungry child. When she found a few fruits on her long walks, she gave half to an old man who could no longer walk far. The villagers noticed her generosity, but instead of praising her, many mocked her. "What good is she?" they whispered. "She has nothing, yet she acts like a saint. Even beggars must know their place." The laughter stung, though Amina never let her tears fall in public. In the silence of night, when her mother's breathing echoed softly in the small hut, she allowed herself to feel the weight of loneliness. Poverty was not only about hunger, it was about the way people looked at you as though you were less than human. Yet, despite the cruelty around her, Amina clung to hope. She believed that kindness was never wasted, even if it went unnoticed. Every morning, as the rooster crowed and she prepared herself for the day, something strange and unexplainable happened. Outside her door, on a small wooden tray, she found food. Sometimes it was a piece of roasted yam, sometimes a handful of fresh maize, other times a small bowl of soup still warm as if placed only moments before. She never saw who left it. She asked her neighbors, but they denied any knowledge, and many scoffed, saying, "No one would waste food on you." Yet, the food appeared without fail, placed carefully at her doorstep with quiet consistency. At first, Amina thought it must be a trick, but her mother encouraged her to accept it as a blessing. "The world is not without mercy," her mother whispered one evening. "Even in the harshest drought, kindness finds a way." And so Amina took the food gratefully, praying for the unknown giver, never once imagining the truth that lay hidden behind this daily miracle. Every morning, a stranger left food at her doorstep. Life in the village moved to the rhythm of survival. At dawn, women carried baskets on their heads and pots in their arms as they walked toward the few wells that had not dried up. Men left for the fields, though the soil yielded little more than disappointment. Children ran barefoot through the dust, their laughter a fragile attempt to forget the hunger gnawing inside them. At night, small fires flickered in front of huts, and families gathered to share what little they had or to whisper about others, because in times of scarcity, gossip became a form of entertainment. It was in these whispers that kindness and cruelty lived side by side, each one battling for dominance in people's hearts. In the evenings, elders would sit under the great baobab tree, their voices carrying the authority of age. They spoke of times when the rivers were full, when granaries overflowed, when festivals brought music and dancing. But the younger villagers, hardened by the current struggles, scoffed at these stories. "What good are tales of abundance when our children sleep hungry?" they asked. The village had grown bitter and jealousy brewed like a hidden fire. Whoever had a little more than others became the subject of resentment, and whoever seemed fortunate became a target of suspicion. It was in this atmosphere that the mystery of Amina's daily food gift began to stir the people. Each morning she found the tray at her doorstep, always fresh, always placed with care. The giver never revealed himself, but he never failed to come. Amina never boasted, but villagers noticed. They watched her carry food into her hut and they wondered. Soon, whispers filled the air like restless birds. "Who is giving her food every day?" one woman asked as she pounded millet with unnecessary force. "Perhaps she has found favor with the spirits," another answered. "Or perhaps, she is cursed." Some nodded gravely, ready to believe anything. Others suggested darker reasons. No one gives freely, a man spat. She must have made some kind of pact. Maybe she is bewitched. The rumors spread quickly, and laughter often followed Amina wherever she went. Children sometimes sang mocking songs behind her, and women shook their heads as if pitying her. But Amina, though hurt, chose silence. She defended her dignity not with loud words but with her calm demeanor. She walked with her head held high, refusing to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Yet her silence did not end the gossip. Instead, it made the villagers even more suspicious. To them, a secret kept was a secret full of danger. "Why does she not tell us who this man is?" they demanded of one another. "What is she hiding?" The truth was simple. Amina herself did not know. Each morning she awoke to the same mystery. She had tried once to stay awake all night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the giver, but she had fallen asleep beside her mother's bed. Another time, she rose before dawn and opened her door early, only to find the tray already waiting for her. Whoever this stranger was, he moved with the silence of a shadow. He was always hooded, that much she managed to see once from the corner of her eye. On a day when she stepped outside earlier than usual, she caught sight of a tall figure, dressed in a plain cloak with a hood pulled low over his face. His movements were deliberate and quiet, his steps leaving little trace in the dust. He placed the tray carefully at her door and disappeared before she could call out. The sight left her with more questions than answers. Why was he hiding his face? Why did he never speak? And most of all, why her? As days turned into weeks, Amina's gratitude grew, but so did her curiosity. She prayed for the stranger every night, asking that the spirits of the ancestors bless him, whoever he was. Her mother, with her frail voice, often said, "The one who feeds the hungry walks closely with the gods." These words comforted Amina, but they did not quiet her restless thoughts. While Amina wrestled with her mystery, the contrast between her silent benefactor and the village chief grew sharper. Chief Okoro, a man of wealth and influence, lived in a larger hut than anyone else. His granary still held stores of food, yet he rarely shared. When desperate families came begging, he waved them away unless they offered labor or gifts in return. "A chief is not a beggar," he declared. "If you want food, you must earn it." His voice carried authority, but it lacked compassion. Villagers obeyed him out of fear rather than respect. The injustice was plain to see. The chief, who had plenty, gave nothing freely. Yet the hooded stranger, who never revealed his face or demanded thanks, gave every morning without fail. Some villagers began to whisper comparisons. "The chief hoards like a greedy rat," they muttered. "But someone among us, someone brave, gives as though the gods themselves guide his hand." Others silenced them quickly, afraid the chief might hear and punish such talk. Still, the mystery became impossible to ignore. Amina found herself at the center of a storm she had not created. Women avoided sitting near her at the well, and men eyed her suspiciously. Yet at the same time, a few kind souls defended her. "Leave the girl alone," one elder said. "If she is fed, then let her eat. What harm is there in that?" But in a village where envy burned hotter than kindness, these voices were drowned out. Amina endured all this quietly, holding on to her dignity as best she could. Inside her heart, however, the questions swirled endlessly. She could not help but wonder who this mysterious man was. Why did he care? What compelled him to risk the gossip and anger of others to help her? Some nights, as she lay awake listening to the shallow breaths of her mother, Amina whispered into the darkness, "Who are you?" Her curiosity grew, but so did her resolve. Whoever he was, she owed him gratitude, not suspicion. Still, a small flame of determination burned inside her. One day she would find out who the stranger was, and she would look into his eyes to thank him. One morning, long before the first rooster crowed, Amina decided she could no longer let the mystery consume her. She tied her scarf tighter around her head and sat silently by the door, her heart thudding in her chest. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of dust and faint smoke from dying fires. Her mother stirred lightly in her sleep, coughing softly, but Amina remained still, her eyes fixed on the small cracks in the door. She waited. Time stretched endlessly, and just as her eyelids threatened to close, she heard it, the sound of footsteps, light and deliberate. Slowly the door creaked open, and Amina peered out into the gray light of dawn. There he was, the hooded stranger. His cloak brushed the ground as he moved, and in his hands, he carried the familiar wooden tray. He bent gently to place it at her doorstep, his movements as careful as though he feared to wake the earth itself. For a moment, Amina thought she might finally gather the courage to speak. But the words stuck in her throat, and by the time she blinked, the man was already walking away, his steps quickening. Driven by curiosity and determination, Amina stepped out and followed. She kept her distance, afraid that any sound would betray her. Her bare feet moved lightly across the dirt path, her breath shallow. The man's stride was strong and purposeful, and though he seemed unaware of her, he never looked back. He walked past the clusters of huts, past the well, and toward the towering trees at the edge of the village. Amina hesitated. Those trees marked the beginning of the royal forest, a place forbidden to commoners. Legends said spirits dwelled there, and guards often patrolled to keep intruders away. But the man walked straight in, his figure blending into the shadows between the trees. Amina's courage faltered, and though she wanted to follow, fear froze her feet. She watched until the cloak vanished into the forest, leaving her with more questions than answers. That night, as Amina lay beside her mother, she confessed what she had seen. Her mother's eyes widened, and she grasped her daughter's hand tightly. "The royal forest?" she whispered. "Child, that is no ordinary man. The spirits of that place do not suffer the footsteps of the unworthy." Her voice trembled but then softened. "Last night I dreamed of a lion standing guard at our hut. Its mane glowed like fire, and its eyes were fixed on us with a fierce kindness. I believe, Amina, that we are being protected." Amina listened with unease. Dreams carried meaning in their culture, and her mother's vision of a lion could not be dismissed. It suggested power, nobility, perhaps even danger. Who was this man that entered the sacred forest so freely? And why had fate tied his path to hers? The following days grew tense. Villagers noticed her distracted glances toward the forest, and gossip sharpened into accusation. One morning at the well, a woman confronted her. "Why do you walk like someone hiding secrets? Why does food appear for you while our children starve?" Others joined in, voices rising with suspicion. "She is no ordinary girl," someone shouted. "She has bewitched a man to serve her. No wonder she dares to keep quiet about him." The words stung, and soon the whispers turned into demands. "Bring her before the council." Dragged unwillingly into the village square, Amina stood trembling before the elders. Her head bowed, her hands clenched tightly, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes burning into her. The chief, sitting proudly at the head of the council, sneered. "This girl walks under the shadow of secrets," he declared. "And in times of hunger, secrets are dangerous. Tell us, Amina, who feeds you?" Her voice shook as she answered truthfully. "I do not know, my chief. Each morning the food is there, but I have never seen his face, never heard his name." Laughter and scorn erupted among the crowd. "Lies?" someone cried. "She consorts with spirits." Another voice hissed, "She will bring a curse upon us all." The chief raised his hand for silence, his eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. "If you cannot prove your innocence, girl, then you must face punishment. We cannot allow sorcery to take root among us." Just as Amina's knees threatened to buckle, a commanding voice cut through the air. "Enough." The word was calm but carried an authority that silenced even the boldest tongues. All eyes turned as a cloaked figure stepped into the square, his hood shadowing his face. His presence radiated a quiet strength, and though no one recognized him, none dared to stop him. "I am the one," he said firmly. "I placed the food at her door. She is guilty of nothing but being the daughter of a sick woman. If you would punish her, then punish me." The crowd gasped, murmurs breaking out, but the chief's face twisted with frustration. Before he could speak, the stranger's hand brushed aside part of his cloak, revealing clothing too fine to belong to an ordinary farmer. Even in the fading light, the fabric shimmered with quality. His voice, though restrained, carried the polish of someone raised in nobility, and when he lifted his hand, Amina caught a glimpse of smooth skin, uncalloused, unlike the rough hands of men who labored daily in the fields. The elders shifted uneasily, unsure of how to respond. No one dared accuse this man directly, for there was something unmistakably powerful in his bearing. With a slight bow, the stranger turned to Amina and spoke gently, "You are free of blame. Do not fear these false accusations." Then, as quickly as he appeared, he stepped back into the crowd, disappearing before anyone could stop him. Amina's heart raced, torn between relief and bewilderment. His words had saved her from humiliation and punishment, but they also deepened the mystery. His voice was too refined, his hands too clean, his clothes too rich. Who was he? She thought of the royal forest, of her mother's dream of the lion, of the way he carried himself. All the pieces seemed to point toward something greater than she dared to imagine. That night, as she lay awake staring at the roof of her hut, her thoughts churned. Gratitude filled her, but so did fear. To know more might bring danger, yet to remain ignorant left her restless. She whispered into the darkness, "Who are you, stranger? Why do you care for me?" The silence gave no answer, but Amina felt the weight of a truth drawing nearer, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. The rains that the villagers prayed for never came. The sky remained stubbornly dry, mocking their hopes with nothing but clouds that dissolved before they could weep. The earth grew harder, crops shriveled before reaching their full height, and the once lively goats and cattle collapsed one after another. Hunger became unbearable, clawing at the bellies of children, stealing the energy of the elderly, and driving even the strongest men into despair. In this time of famine, suspicion sharpened like a knife. People no longer looked at one another with compassion but with envy, and envy soon turned into fury. It was only a matter of time before the villagers' restless anger found a target. Amina's small hut, once pitted as the home of the poorest girl in the village, became the focus of their resentment. "She does not starve like we do," they whispered angrily. "Her cheeks are not hollow, her mother is still alive and food never leaves her hands. She hides something, she mocks us with her secret abundance." Soon the whispers rose into shouts. One evening a crowd gathered outside her hut, their eyes wild with hunger, their voices trembling with rage. Amina, inside with her sick mother, heard the thundering of fists against her door. She clutched her mother's hand as fear flooded her veins. "Come out," voices roared. "Show us the food you hide. Do you think you can fatten yourself while our children starve?" The door shook under their blows, and Amina knew it would not hold for long. Trembling, she opened it, hoping her calm might cool their anger. But the sight of her face only enraged them further. Men and women pushed their way into the hut, overturning baskets, scattering mats, searching desperately for the stores they were certain she kept hidden. When they found nothing but emptiness, their anger only grew. "You have bewitched us," a woman screamed. "This is sorcery, how else could you eat when we starve?" Others raised their fists, ready to drag her before the council again, perhaps even ready to end her life. But then a powerful voice cut through the chaos. "Enough." The sound was so commanding that even the most furious villagers froze. At the doorway stood the hooded stranger, his figure tall and immovable against the twilight. His cloak flowed behind him as though stirred by a wind no one else could feel. He stepped inside with calm authority, and the crowd parted instinctively, their anger dimming into fear. "You seek food where there is none," the man said, his voice steady. "This girl hides nothing from you. She is guilty of no crime but compassion. If you are hungry, then your anger belongs elsewhere." The villagers stared at him in silence, for there was something in his tone that none could resist. Slowly he raised his hands to his hood. Time seemed to hold its breath as he pulled it back, revealing not the face of an ordinary man, but the face of their king. Gasps filled the hut, and those nearest stumbled backward, bowing their heads in shock. The man who had walked silently among them, placing food at Amina's door, was none other than King Adewale, ruler of the land. His eyes, steady and piercing, swept over the crowd. "Yes," he said, "it is I. I came among you in disguise, for I was weary of the lies of greedy men. My chiefs told me you lived well, that you had no need, that your hunger was satisfied. But I knew in my heart that these were falsehoods. So I left my palace and came to see with my own eyes." The villagers fell to their knees, trembling with awe and shame. Many wept, unable to believe they had mocked and scorned the very man who ruled them. The Chief Okoro, who stood in the crowd, tried to mask his fear, but sweat beaded on his forehead. His power, built on lies and hoarded wealth, was crumbling in that moment. The king turned to Amina, his gaze softening. "You did not know who I was, yet you never ceased to be grateful. Your humility, your strength, and your kindness to others, even in your poverty, have touched me more deeply than you can imagine. While others scorned you, you gave away what little you had. In you, I have seen the true heart of my people." Tears welled in Amina's eyes as she bowed low, unable to comprehend that the stranger she had prayed for was the king himself. Then the king's voice grew firm again. He faced the villagers and declared, "From this day forth, no one in this village shall go hungry while I sit upon the throne. The food stored in the royal granaries will be distributed fairly to all. Those who have hoarded in greed will answer for their crimes." His words struck like thunder, and murmurs of relief rippled through the crowd. For the first time in many moons, hope flickered in their hearts. The chief tried to protest, stammering about loyalty and respect, but the king silenced him with a single raised hand. "You have betrayed your people," he said coldly. "While they starved, you feasted. While they begged, you turned them away. Your punishment will be swift and just." Guards, summoned by the king's gesture, emerged from the shadows and seized the chief. His cries of protest echoed into the night, but no one came to his defense. Days later, the scene shifted to the royal court, where Amina, dressed in fine but modest garments provided by the king's attendants, stood before a hall filled with nobles, chiefs, and villagers invited to witness the moment. The palace, with its carved pillars and golden draperies, seemed like another world to her, yet she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she always had. The king addressed the court. "This young woman, though poor in possessions, has shown herself richer in spirit than many who sit upon thrones of comfort. In her we see the values our land must never forget: humility, compassion, and strength." He placed a hand on her shoulder, and the court bowed in respect. "From this day Amina will be honored among us. She shall not live in want again, and her mother shall be cared for as though she were of royal blood." The hall erupted in applause, though some chiefs looked on with unease, reminded of their own corruption. Amina bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had never asked for reward, never imagined such honor, yet here she stood, her life forever changed. The villagers who had once mocked her now wept with shame. They remembered their cruel words, their laughter, their suspicion, and they lowered their heads in sorrow. But Amina, with her forgiving heart, did not look upon them with anger. She thought, instead of the lion in her mother's dream, of the stranger's steady hands placing food at her door, of the kindness that had saved her life. And so, the truth was revealed. The hooded stranger was the king in disguise, and the girl once ridiculed for her poverty was now celebrated for her spirit. The famine still raged beyond the village, but hope had been rekindled. A new chapter began, one where justice triumphed over greed, and compassion rose above cruelty. The village that once mocked Amina was now filled with silence. The people who had rushed into her hut with angry shouts and accusing words stood frozen in shame, their eyes wide as the hooded stranger revealed himself to be their king. The very man they had whispered about, the one they had suspected of witchcraft, was in truth the ruler of the land who had disguised himself to witness the suffering of his people. Amina, who only moments earlier had feared for her life, could barely find her breath. She looked at him in disbelief, her eyes wide and her lips trembling. The king's face was calm, yet there was a fire in his gaze, a fire that burned with justice, disappointment, and compassion all at once. He raised his hand, silencing the villagers who dared not speak now. "Enough," the king declared, his voice carrying the weight of authority that echoed beyond the dusty huts. "You have accused this woman of crimes she never committed. You have mocked her poverty and despised her humility. Yet it was she, not you, who showed a heart greater than gold." The guards seized the corrupt chief, who trembled and begged for mercy. But the king's word was final. "You hoarded grain while your people starved. You fed lies to your king while they suffered. You, who were trusted to lead, betrayed your people." With a wave of his hand, the chief was dragged away, his cries swallowed by the silence of the crowd. Then, turning to Amina, the king's expression softened. He stepped closer, his cloak falling aside, and he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You gave kindness even when you had nothing. You shared water when you yourself were thirsty. You cared for your mother with love when others turned away. Amina, your strength humbles me." Her knees grew weak and she knelt before him, but the king bent down and lifted her up himself. "Stand," he said firmly, "for humility does not belong in the dust. Today you stand as a daughter of this kingdom." Tears welled in Amina's eyes, but for the first time in many years, they were not tears of sorrow but of hope. Her mother, frail but smiling from where she sat on a small mat, reached out with trembling hands. The king noticed and called for his physicians. They rushed forward with herbs, ointments, and clean water. For the first time in a long while, Amina's mother received proper care, and within weeks her strength began to return. The transformation in the village was swift. The king ordered the royal granaries to be opened, and carts of food arrived, not hidden or stolen, but distributed openly among the people. The children who had once gone to sleep hungry now ate until their bellies were full. The women who had walked miles for water found wells being dug by the king's men. Hope, once a stranger in that village, became a familiar friend. And yet, in the middle of all this change, Amina remained the same. She still woke early to tend to her mother, still shared what little she had, and still greeted her neighbors with kindness. But now, when she walked through the village, people did not laugh at her. They lowered their heads in respect, ashamed of their past cruelty and grateful for the lesson her life had taught them. At a great gathering in the royal court, the king spoke to his people. His throne was decorated with golden carvings and fine cloth, but his words were not those of a ruler speaking from pride. He raised his hand, calling for silence, and said, "The true wealth of a kingdom does not lie in its gold or its armies. It lies in the heart of its poorest child. It lies in the kindness that survives even in the dust of poverty. For if a people despise their poorest neighbor, then they despise the very foundation upon which a kingdom stands." All eyes turned toward Amina, who stood humbly at the side of the hall. Dressed simply, her head bowed, she never sought attention, but the king pointed to her and declared, "This woman who you mocked, who you shamed, has shown more greatness than many who sit on thrones. Let her life be a reminder that dignity and compassion cannot be bought, and that even unseen acts of kindness can change destinies." The villagers bowed their heads in shame, some with tears streaming down their faces. Those who had once mocked her now came forward, apologizing and begging forgiveness. Amina, true to her nature, forgave them with gentle words, reminding them that bitterness only poisons the heart. "Let us build kindness among us," she said softly, "for we have seen how quickly fortunes can change." From that day on, the village was never the same. Where gossip had once filled the air, songs of gratitude now echoed. Where envy had once poisoned friendships, sharing and cooperation flourished. And where despair had once crushed hope, a new spirit of unity rose among the people. Amina did not become rich, nor did she seek to. She continued to live simply, but with a dignity that no one could deny. Her mother regained her health and lived her final years in peace, proud of her daughter's strength. The villagers who once mocked them now came to her for advice, for in her humility they saw wisdom. As seasons passed, travelers from distant lands spoke of the story of the poor woman who had unknowingly shared her kindness with a king. Her tale spread far beyond the borders of the village, becoming a lesson told to children by firesides and repeated in marketplaces across the kingdom. And whenever people asked the king why he chose to walk among his people in disguise, he would simply smile and say, "Because sometimes the greatest truths are hidden where we least expect them. And sometimes the poorest home hides the richest heart." So the story closed not with wealth or power, but with a truth that shone brighter than gold. Kindness is never wasted. Every act, no matter how small, carries within it the power to change a destiny. And as long as even one heart dares to show compassion, hope will never die.